The Ardennes Forest, December 1944. A biting wind cuts through the skeletal trees. Here, under the shroud of a deceptive calm, a storm was brewing. A storm of steel, ambition, and desperation. The German war machine, battered but not broken, prepared for a final, audacious gamble. The Western Front, winter of '44. Allied forces, exhausted and overextended, held a tenuous grip on the lands they'd liberated. In the shadows, a desperate gamble was being plotted. A last, desperate surge to shatter the enemy lines and seize the initiative. For the German High Command, it was a race against time. The Eastern Front bled the nation dry. The Allied advance in the West threatened to suffocate them. The stakes were everything. Halt the relentless Allied advance, split their forces, and buy Germany one last, desperate breath. At the heart of the plan, a belief in the impossible, a belief fueled by desperation and delusion. The Führer, convinced of his own military genius, laid out his plan. A plan built on secrecy, speed, and the element of surprise. The Ardennes, however, had its own ideas. The weather, brutal and unforgiving, became an enemy in itself. Supplies were stretched thin. The meticulously planned timetable was already beginning to fray at the edges. The seeds of failure were sown. On December 16th, the offensive roared to life. A massive artillery barrage shattered the early morning silence, unleashing a maelstrom of fire and fury. The Blitzkrieg, reborn, aimed to sweep aside the unsuspecting Americans. Panzers tore through the forest, spearheading the advance, creating chaos and disruption. German infantry, following close behind, flooded into the breach. The goal? To break through the Allied lines and race towards the vital supply depots. The Americans, caught in the crossfire, were stunned. The initial shock was profound. Units were overrun, command and control faltered. The carefully laid plans of the Allies began to unravel. The advance was swift, relentless. German infantry pushed forward, fighting through the freezing forests, determined to maintain the momentum. They encountered pockets of resistance, but the initial gains were substantial. The Allied response, however, was swift. Artillery barrages rained down on the advancing Germans. The Americans, reeling from the initial shock, began to regroup, to find their resolve. The 72-hour clock had begun, and the fatal flaw of the Blitzkrieg was about to be revealed. But the Allied lines, though breached, did not break. Across the shattered landscape, American soldiers, outmanned and outgunned, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and courage. Pockets of resistance, tenacious and unrelenting, became islands of defiance. The Blitzkrieg, built on speed and surprise, demanded a relentless flow of supplies. But the Ardennes, a maze of narrow roads and unforgiving terrain, proved a formidable adversary. The lifeblood of the offensive, the fuel and ammunition, was slowly, agonizingly choked off. Then, the skies opened. American air power, unleashed at last, descended upon the exposed German columns. The Luftwaffe, weakened and depleted, could offer little resistance. The tide was turning, subtly, inexorably. The relentless assault began to take its toll. Tanks, the spearhead of the offensive, were disabled. Men fell. The vaunted German war machine, once seemingly invincible, was being bled dry. The cost of Hitler's ambition was becoming tragically clear. The Americans, bloodied but unbowed, began to regroup. Scattered units, once isolated, found each other. They prepared for the inevitable counterattacks, their resolve hardening in the face of adversity. Their spirit had not been broken. The German advance, initially swift, began to falter. The soldiers, exhausted and dispirited, encountered resistance at every turn. They pushed forward, driven by orders, but the initial impetus was gone. The cracks in the facade were widening. American paratroopers deployed behind enemy lines struck at the German supply lines and communications networks. Fresh reinforcements poured into the battle, bolstering the Allied ranks. The strategic advantage of the German attack was quickly evaporating. Freezing conditions slowed the offensive still further. German infantry, ill-equipped for the brutal winter, succumbed to frostbite and exhaustion. The very elements turned against them. Within 72 hours, the initial thrust had stalled. The dream of a swift victory shattered. The relentless cold, the unwavering resistance, and the fatal flaw of overconfidence had sealed the fate of Hitler's final gamble. In the Ardennes, the fighting was ferocious. American resistance, initially caught off guard, stiffened. The battlefield became a churning maelstrom of destruction. The first clashes revealed a grim truth. This was no walkover. The lifeblood of any Blitzkrieg, fuel. But the logistics of the Ardennes offensive were a nightmare. Supply lines, stretched to their absolute limit, became a vulnerable Achilles heel. The advance, once a roaring tide, began to stall. The crisis was worsening with every passing hour. American resolve, fueled by the desperation of a desperate situation, solidified. Reinforcements began to arrive, bolstering the defensive lines. The initial shock of the German assault began to wear off. The American spirit, though tested, began to push back. Momentum was changing. The relentless attrition took its toll. Units, exhausted, running dangerously low on ammunition and supplies, felt the icy grip of defeat. Soldiers, once brimming with confidence, were now shadows of their former selves. American reinforcements arrived, a relentless stream of men and equipment. The tide had turned irreversibly. The relentless counterattacks began to grind down the seemingly invincible German machine. The assault was now a desperate struggle for survival. American air power, unleashed upon the beleaguered German forces, sealed their fate. Relentless airstrikes pummeled supply lines, destroyed key infrastructure, and decimated troop concentrations. The 72-hour collapse was rapidly approaching its harrowing conclusion. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's desperate gamble, was unraveling. The vaunted Blitzkrieg, once a symbol of German invincibility, now tasted the bitter sting of retreat. The grand plan, meticulously crafted in Berlin, was failing. The offensive, designed to split the Allied forces and seize the vital port of Antwerp, was grinding to a halt. The illusion of momentum, so carefully cultivated, was dissolving. Across the battle lines, the Americans, initially caught off guard, were now rallying. Their superior numbers and logistical capabilities began to assert themselves. They fought with a tenacity that surprised even the seasoned German veterans. The collapse was accelerating. Morale shattered. The relentless Allied counterattacks, coupled with crippling supply shortages, had broken the spirit of many German units. Surrender, once unthinkable, became the only option for survival. Among the German command, the reality of the situation was sinking in. The meticulously planned offensive, the last great gamble, was a catastrophic failure. The cost of defeat, in men, in materiel, in the future of the Third Reich, was becoming horrifyingly clear. The Allied response was swift and decisive. With their superior armored divisions, they exploited the gaps in the German lines with brutal efficiency. The once feared panzer divisions were now outmaneuvered, outgunned, and out of fuel. Chaos reigned. The meticulous organization of the German army had dissolved into a desperate scramble for survival. Units were fragmented, communication lines severed, and supplies were non-existent. The Blitzkrieg, once a symbol of coordinated destruction, was now a symbol of utter and complete disarray. The battlefield bore witness to the cost of Hitler's ambition. The Ardennes was littered with the wreckage of once mighty tanks, the shattered remnants of once proud infantry units, and the frozen bodies of the fallen. The 72-hour collapse of Hitler's Ardennes offensive revealed the fatal flaw at the heart of the Third Reich. Overconfidence and a reliance on outdated doctrine had led to catastrophic miscalculation. The dream of a renewed offensive was shattered. The Allied advance continued, inexorably, towards Berlin. The end was near.
confirmed, sir. The Americans have reached the Elbe.
It is the end. There is no hope left.